Hello, xin chào, thầy Tony đây. Hôm nay chúng tôi có một cơ hội cực kỳ hấp dẫn để trao đổi với thầy Andy Seymour. Thầy Andy không chỉ là cố vấn của chương trình College Campus, có bằng thạc sĩ về giáo dục và đã từng dạy ở các trường quốc tế tại Việt Nam cũng như các trường ở nước Mỹ luôn. Và hôm nay thầy Andy chia sẻ rất nhiều chủ đề rất hay, nhưng Tony xin nhấn mạnh 3 điều. Cái thứ nhất là nếu bạn nào có băn khoăn về IB hoặc AP thì thầy Andy sẽ chia sẻ cái sự khác biệt nằm ở đâu. Cái thứ hai là nếu bạn nào băn khoăn làm sao mình chuẩn bị hồ sơ và đặc biệt là CV để xin được việc làm và làm cho cái profile của mình hấp dẫn hơn cho các đại học. Và cái thứ ba là làm sao có được cái kinh nghiệm để trên cái CV đó để cho nó hấp dẫn. Xin mời quý vị khán giả lắng nghe thầy Andy. Dù thầy Andy và thầy Tony sẽ nói chuyện với nhau bằng tiếng Anh, quý vị có thể bật phụ đề để theo dõi thảo luận của chúng tôi.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Tony. Dạ thưa, thầy nói tiếng Việt không giỏi, xin quý vị bỏ qua cho.
Hello, xin chào. Chào mừng các bạn đã đến với Chuyện Du học, chuỗi podcast được thành lập bởi chương trình College Campus của Everest Education. Đây là nơi chúng ta chia sẻ những câu chuyện truyền cảm hứng liên quan đến quá trình chuẩn bị hồ sơ du học, cũng như cuộc sống và văn hóa tại Mỹ. Tôi là Tony Ngô, chủ tịch và đồng sáng lập của Everest Education và là người dẫn dắt podcast hôm nay. Trở lại với Season 2, mùa phát sóng thứ 2, Chuyện Du học sẽ mang đến những góc nhìn mới về trải nghiệm của cụ học sinh của đại học danh tiếng Stanford, UPenn, Amherst. Ngoài ra, chúng tôi cũng đã mời các chuyên gia trong các lĩnh vực, những cố vấn du học giàu kinh nghiệm của College Campus tham gia mùa 2. Hứa hẹn mang đến góc nhìn 360 độ về hành trình du học sắp tới của các em học sinh. Các bạn đã sẵn sàng chưa? Let's go!
Cool.
I am super excited that we have this opportunity, Andy. You've not only worked with us as a college campus counselor, but you have a rich history in education yourself, right? Can I ask you to give 30 seconds to introduce your background? Because I think it's super relevant for all of our families.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity here. It's great to talk about these ideas on a podcast like this. A little bit about myself. I guess the first quick introduction is I've spent most of my life in schools, either as a student or a teacher. And I never expected that to be the case. 18 years as a student, 12 years as a teacher. I started out with ESL, then a very short stint in the public schools in the US, realized I wouldn't last very long there. International schools, and then I ran yoga teacher trainings here in Saigon. And then after that, now I'm here with College Campus, helping students one-on-one, working on their goals. So short summary there.
Fantastic. Andy Seymour, College Campus advisor, Master's in Education, International Baccalaureate School teacher at American International School in Vietnam, and a yoga teacher on top of all that. Fantastic. Really nice to have you here with us today, Andy. All right, speed round, just so everyone can get to know you a little bit. What is your favorite Vietnamese dish?
Favorite Vietnamese dish would be mi quang. I love it. It's almost kind of hard to find, in Saigon. I mean, it's okay. There's a few places I go. It's like kind of the ignored, it's like the third soup that like nobody ever, you got pho, you got bún bò Huế, and then mi quang. That's my favorite, hardest one to find. So whenever I'm in Da Nang, that's what I get.
Oh, so maybe this answers my next question, but when you're in Vietnam, what is your favorite city to visit?
Favorite city would be Cat Ba Island. I love rock climbing, and it's just like, not only is there climbing, but it's just a small island. There's hiking, deep water soloing where you climb and then drop in the water. It's the only place in Vietnam you can do it. And every time I go there, I have a great time. And it's not very crowded. It feels the same now as it did when I went a decade ago. So, great spot.
I've been there. I've done the rock climbing in Cat Ba Island. That's awesome. What is your favorite city to visit in the world outside of Vietnam?
Favorite city to visit in the world, I would say, is Boulder, Colorado. That's where I went to school. And Boulder, again, mostly for the climbing. And then I guess everything else about it, but it's almost like, I think I've been priced out of Boulder. I think most people have. And so even, when I've gone back to visit recently, it's like, every time you're there, it's just money just kind of disappears, right? It's one of those places where it's, how do I say? I went to school there, and 20 years later, it's still my favorite place to, visit and hang out and, just enjoy everything it has to offer, mostly climbing.
Fantastic. And your personal background by geography, you spent some time in Vietnam, right? Quite a bit of time in Vietnam. Then you left, went back to the US, but then you decided to come back. And that's actually pretty unusual for expats to do. What brought you back?
Right. So every job I've had here in Saigon between ESL, international school, yoga, and this coaching job, I would say literally was my best job opportunity. You know, like I was looking at other similar jobs. I was in the US last year for COVID and looking at other job postings that were similar to this. Again, best opportunity. And I'd worked with Everest, you know, had a pretty good idea of, you know, how things run here. And so I would say the same for the yoga trainings. You know, the market in the US is very saturated. I found just enough opportunity to enter there. I went to a job fair in Iowa, the biggest international job fair, and I had 2 interviews and I had 1 job offer. And I said, okay, I'm going back to Saigon. That's cool, you know, and it worked out great. And I stayed there for 4 years, great opportunity, way more opportunity than I had, you know, when I was student teaching in the public schools in the States. And so same thing, like just for teaching opportunities, you know, Vietnam, you know, couldn't ask for more.
All right. So jumping into this, I think that you would be a perfect person to comment on this here, between kind of international schools versus other types of formats, particularly public schools there. We have a lot of families who are transitioning from public schools or bilingual schools and trying to apply to schools like American International School and lots of other great international schools. Can I get you in 30 seconds to say which is better, AP or IB?
So I would say IB. And again, I have not taught AP, but talking to other AP teachers, I'd say it's a lot of memorization, you know, a lot of memorization. And again, I can't really speak to it, but the IB is more holistic, you could say. And again, not a perfect curriculum, but just, I would say, much better in terms of a well-rounded curriculum. Like I taught theory of knowledge, and that's one of the ways where you can really break out of just the, you know, memorizing content and repeating it on a test, you know, like it's, you know, aspects like that of the IB really take it to the next level.
You've worked with so many students to help them draft their CVs over the years. What advice do you have to somebody who may not have a great CV yet? What should they do as a student?
Like, so drafting a good CV is something every student needs to do, but no student wants to do. And we always try to avoid it. But as soon as it gets done, it makes life easier, right? It's just do it, and then doors that previously were unopened are suddenly open. Not just by the CV, but applying the CV, you know, to jobs on LinkedIn and all of that. And so the challenge up to the student is, you know, finding an opportunity where they can use that CV. So we're talking volunteer opportunities, internships, something that's competitive, where the student basically now is competing against other people they don't know for something that matters to them. And then that's how we're able to, I guess, motivate them to, you know, work through, you know, writing a solid next draft of their CV.
So as a coach, you guide students through the CV process by first helping motivate them to have a reason why they need a great CV. Can you walk us through an example of how that might look for somebody?
Right. So one of my students a week ago, we had, I'd say, like a really successful, like kind of a breakthrough moment. And it was so simple. It was, you know, she's an 11th grader and she's looking to get into, you know, hospitals, not necessarily as a doctor. She doesn't want to do all of the med school, but maybe on the management side, which also it's kind of a balance between management and, you know, technical medical knowledge. And so if you have that, you still have nothing, basically. You know, I have an idea of what I might want to be. And so most students don't take the next step. And the next step, in this case, literally took 1 hour of her time. And it's like before we had nothing, and now we have everything. So what I asked her to do is, you know, go to LinkedIn, set up a profile. You don't even need a picture or anything. Just set up a profile to search. And then I showed her, you know, medical affairs manager jobs in Saigon. There were about 60 of them. And I said, okay, now what you're going to do is find a couple of these jobs that would look like dream jobs for you. And that's exactly what she did. And after she had 2 specific jobs with job descriptions, qualifications, all of that, instantly in 1 hour, we went from some vague idea to something super specific. And she was like doubling down on it. She's like, oh yeah, this is definitely what I want to do. Like, I'm real interested in this. And so now we're just in the next steps of, you know, now writing her CV to apply for entry-level jobs or internships that start her along that career path.
That's awesome. So in 1 focused hour, you helped her go from essentially nothing, an idea, to setting up a LinkedIn profile, researching 2 or 3 jobs that are relevant to her as like ideal jobs, and seeing what the bullets are, right, that are relevant for her to copy and use in her resume, in her CV, so that she knows she can, what point she needs to emphasize.
Right, and so like that's all it took. It doesn't get any easier than that. And it's like until you have like a job description and all of, those bullet points about what you need to do specifically, it's almost like you don't have anything, and it's almost, easier to just kind of hide from it. But it's never been easier, like I said, with LinkedIn to do that. And so that method wouldn't work for every student, but I've been pushing that on students. And then last week, it took about an hour, and here we are. So for example, what she was doing last year, she was volunteering at a hospital, which is very hard for her to do because she did it through her friend who has a connection. And all she was doing was there's some heart rate monitor program that they were researching. So she was basically putting the electrodes, on and off people, which is basically, more or less an unskilled job, right? But they weren't having her do anything else. But she's in a hospital, that's great. She's kind of soaking in the environment. So that helps. And she was talking with me. She was like, well, I'm not sure if I want to continue doing this or not because I'm not really doing anything. And so then I said, okay, well, how about we try this? And so now it's just very clear that to get into business management, she needs a pre-med degree, but then all of her experience needs to be in business management, sales, and none of these jobs require degrees in that. And so the point is she needs to pick up all that experience somewhere outside of, her pre-med degree. And good news is she can get started on all of that right now. She needs to learn complex sales, all of these different things that you don't necessarily need to do in medicine. You can get started, anywhere with your friends, and any projects that matter to you. And so it just opens up a lot of doors. And, 2 weeks ago, she's like, well, what should I do? And now, we're on a whole different path. And, before LinkedIn, this kind of thing might have been a lot more difficult.
So the stories that you're sharing right there are, I think, so relevant because I've had so many parents and many students themselves come in and say, hey, my child, or I want to go into medicine, or I want to go into business, or I want to go into fashion. I've had, right? And then as we start working with them and do the coaching process, we find out, well, what I want is actually something slightly different or totally different. And so we have to help coach them through identifying where they have the skills and where they may be missing them. And then in your example there, if there's a business management in healthcare as a goal, well, you need a little bit of both skill sets. And then so how do you go chase after the right opportunities to prepare you there? So really appreciate that as one example. I feel like there's been dozens of cases every year that we work with very similar type of challenge. Maybe to go a little bit deeper. So if a student is on LinkedIn and they're trying to find an internship, because a lot of high school students might be interested, but they don't have any background, what is the first thing they should do?
First thing they should do is, in that case, just have a professional photo, and then all of their high school achievements, any certificates that they've been awarded, anything along those lines to demonstrate that, they are somebody who can get the job done. Because in business or just in most jobs, you need to be trained. And so it doesn't necessarily matter if you have the experience as much as I'm a person who can get the job done. And so if you can just demonstrate that with a few examples, on your LinkedIn profile, and then you reach out from there, that's step one. Step two, I would say, is do a little research on the people and the businesses that you are interested in. And this is something that College Compass definitely helps students out with, where it's one thing to reach out to someone and say, hey, you have something I need, can I ask you for a favor, right? It's much different to say hey, here's where I think I want to head, here's some of my accomplishments previously, what I love about what you guys do is this, and here's my ask right here. If I got that from, 10th or 11th grader, I would probably respond to it. Cold emailing, doesn't have a high success rate, but when it does, opens up doors that, again, were never there to begin with, until you took this step.
So I think that first step on the preparing your CV and your LinkedIn is necessary, but not sufficient. And one of the biggest challenges that I coach our students through is that they have to be willing to show the grit to go chase down opportunities, because that's the same thing. It shows that they are willing to work really hard despite not having experience. And as a first entry-level intern, that's all you're looking to do is prove yourself with an opportunity that you're not going to waste their time. So I tell them that you have to be willing to knock down all sorts of doors. At a minimum, be emailing everybody to try and get something, but even cold calling until you get the secretary to pick up the phone, and then work your way to try and talk to them to get an interview, just so you're on their radar, right? And yes, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be very hard, but it's a very worthwhile exercise.
One point that I would add to that is I often think the best advice is often the most cliche advice. And to that point, I remember that quote, what is it? It's like, find your way in life, you create it, or you don't find your path, you create it. And that's what cold calling is. And a lot of students get demotivated by that kind of thing. They don't hear back.
Well, I'll tell you this. I've done hundreds of resume drops. I have never been hired in a resume drop. Every single job I've ever gotten is networking my way to it. My internship, my sophomore year in college, my first job, my internship with SEO as a junior, my second internship in an investment bank in New York, my first full-time job out of school at Morgan Stanley. Yes, you drop the resume, but I had to do all this extra networking behind the scenes to go talk to people who are already at the company in order to position myself to rise above everybody else in that huge stack of resumes, right? And same with every job thereafter, has always been networked.
Yeah, I think I've heard that something like 80% of jobs aren't posted, you know? So there you go.
Shifting gears, I think what you do with students is really magical, Andy, because I think it's not just about filling in the blanks on their CVs, not just making sure they have the experience and check the box, but that they have the full holistic picture. And you had this great framework that you shared with me around that before. I was wondering, can you spend 1 minute to just give us a quick overview? What are the 3 buckets that students need to prepare themselves in to be successful?
Great. So what we mentioned before already, like the AP and the IB, what they do a really good job of is helping you with your reasoning skills, right? Sound reasoning skills, very important, but clearly not the full picture, right? And so it's not even a complete education, right? So when I think about, okay, what would make a complete education? You know, you basically need 3 things, like, here are the facts, you know, like here's the knowledge and skills that I have for this job. That's only step 1. Step 2, here's my experience with them. You know, here are the tests that I've passed, and, you know, here's the documented evidence I have of it. There's my experience. Then the number 3, here's how all of that connects to a bigger vision that I find personally meaningful. And here's the problem in my career at the moment, and here's how I'm proactively working as part of the solution. And so again, schools really focus on reason-based, training reasoning skills, which is important, but they almost completely, at least my experience in high school and college, left out those other 2 parts. You know, what's your experience with it, and then why does it matter to you, and why should it matter to anybody else?
Fantastic. So can I dive into knowledge and skills, experience, and then a vision? What do you think is the most important out of those 3 to focus on and to start?
To start, I would probably say experience, because, for example, a lot of people in law school, they find out after they graduate from law school that they don't want to be lawyers because it turns out they're just reading contracts and very sharp-minded, so they were just sort of pushed in that direction. So that's a perfect example of someone who's just in the knowledge and skills domain with no experience. And so I would say experience out of the 3 would be the most important, because like you said, some people say, I want to go into this, and the second dip their toe in the water, like, oh, no, anything but that. And then, okay, that's fine, but now let's try something else. You know, like experience is basically the way to test all this stuff out. The other 2 sides are really abstract without that experience component, because that's where you get the feedback from other people, but you also get it from yourself. You know, like, you know, what did you think about this actually in the real world? And so that's the component that also can be hardest, you know, for a student who wants to go into medicine and they're in 11th grade, right? And so that's where you have to be a little more proactive to break it down further and then find where you can, you know, meet them as an 11th grader. Well, so let me ask you about experience, you know, like the middle section there, which I find to really be the most important kind of driving force, you know, for an education. So like in your time at Everest and with College Compass, I guess what students have you helped reflect on their experiences and internships and maybe send them on a different direction or help them double down on the path they're on?
I mean, to be honest, this happens with almost every student that we work with in some degree or form. I find that most students go through the pathway to just get a club on their resume or get an internship on their resume, but they don't stop to think about why that's important to them. So I always start in my very first consultation with students, I ask them, what is the most significant thing that you've devoted yourself to outside of school? And how far have you gone in it? Like, what is the biggest challenge that you've been willing to endure to pursue that interest? And it's really telling, because I think most students have not really pushed themselves, right? They're kind of going through the high school experience, and so they don't really know what they want. They don't know what reacts to who they are as people.
Well, they've never been these questions before, which is quite interesting, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, hey, what do you want and how are you going to get it? Well, what are you talking about? You know, it's like, you know, they don't have that mindset, you know, because it's
our job. Yeah, right. It's our job as coaches to help lead them to the right set of questions and help them reflect. And we never give them the answers. Our job is to help them think about the question and then guide them on a path so that they can answer it. So one of our favorite students to work with has been Lucas, who has been at a boarding school and he's been working with us for a couple of years. When he came to us, he thought he wanted to do fashion design. Amazing artist, really creative motifs with all sorts of abstract eyes in his paintings and drawings. And he showed me fashion drawings at the same time. And I thought he wanted to be a fashion designer. He thought he might want to be a fashion designer. Lo and behold, after exploring it, talking about it with us, 3 months later, he's like, nope, definitely not fashion design. I think I like the creative aspects, but there's something missing. And we decided together with his parents to explore business. Maybe there's something more on the consulting or finance side. And so 3 months later, we deep dive, what is it like to be in a career in finance or in management consulting? Let's talk to people who are experts in that field, who have done it. And then, 3 months later, it was like, I definitely don't want to do that either. But what I did discover, Tony, is that I think I really want to combine what it's like to be a creative artist in fashion with the problem-solving people skills of running a business and maybe try and do a fashion business. And Lucas is now off building his own fashion business, maybe a fashion empire one day, where he's producing his own bags, his own wallets, his own purses. He found vendors to go manufacture these in Vietnam for him, negotiated the contracts, and now he's partnered with friends to try and do the sales and marketing, to have a website and do e-commerce transactions with it, right? And I've seen friends around LA wearing a couple of these. It's awesome. And so that's one very small example, but that's our job, is to push students as far as they're willing to go in the area that they are passionate about.
I love that for two reasons. Like, first reason is, he basically put together something unique and specific that nobody else could have, designed that for him, right? That job description that you explained. And then second of all, like, no experience, nobody else can, how do I articulate that? You couldn't get that kind of understanding, that kind of realization in a school, in any kind of environment other than only in the real world, when you're seeing people in the fashion industry doing their thing. And then, whole time, do I see myself here, And then there's literally nothing that can replace that. And so that's why I think the experience component, again, it doesn't have to be a significant part of the education, but it's almost like where you test out and reflect on this stuff like Lucas did here. And get basically as far as you can go, it sounds like, in the amount of time that you've worked with them.
But I 100% agree with you. We start with experience. How do we get a meaningful experience starting from wherever the students are at now? Before we let you go, I have 3 final questions for you. First is, what is one book that you would recommend that high school students should read?
So one book that I would recommend for any student, because students always talk about having challenges with time management. And there's a million different books you can read. The one book that I've read, and still to this day, try to follow these principles. And the more that I do follow these principles, the better the results I get. And so the book is Power of Full Engagement by Tony Schwartz. He basically explains how, you always hear about we have these different kinds of energy: physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. But he explains how all 4 of those work together on a very scientific, technical level. And so most people are familiar now with flow states. And this is basically explaining a way to have high performance in a sustainable way. And, it's just some very simple principles that, again, the more I follow these, the better the results I get. And it's accessible to anybody. It's got a lot of easy examples to follow. Highly recommend that.
Fascinating. So I'm a geek when it comes to personal performance and how to be in a more engaged, relaxed, focused state all the time. And not necessarily always working harder, because I work very hard, I feel like, already, but how to work smarter in a way that conserves my most valuable resource, which is not even my time. I realize it's actually my units of attention. So I do a ton of work. I ask a lot of friends, mentors, advisors on how to do that. I started using delta waves, theta waves in the background to adjust my brain to different states more quickly. But I'll definitely add this to my reading list as well.
Yeah, that's part of it. And so even students can go online. There's 10-minute summaries of the book that are illustrated, they're easy to follow. He's got a couple hour-long Google Talks. Great book, check it out. One other fun fact, he actually wrote Donald Trump's book, The Art of the Deal.
And, he was the ghostwriter?
He was the ghostwriter, and he said, this is kind of a funny story, so I'll just share it real briefly, but he was a journalist with a wife and 2 kids, and I think they gave him a $250,000 advance for it. And immediately he was like, this Donald Trump guy, like, he can't even keep focused for 5 minutes. How are we going to write this book? And so what he did is he basically just started observing him. He'd listen to his phone calls and see how he did things, and he wrote the book from there. And then after that experience, he's like, okay, the rest of my life, I'm just going to do whatever the opposite. I need to basically have good karma from here on out. And so he looked at, I guess, like the light side of the force, you might say. He was like, okay, what are the highest performing people, and what principles do they all follow? And he distilled it in just super simple terms that, again, like even these 10-minute summaries on YouTube, just follow those and just, watch the results just come pouring in.
Who is a role model that you look up to in your life, whether personal life, public life?
So I guess there's like a few people. It's like, my job as a college counselor is just to help people with careers and, okay, how's your school doing? And then we also try to do a holistic approach, right? Like, are you having enough breaks? Are you living a balance? Are you balancing school and everything else? Are you managing it? It's so funny that you hear people who are older, who have like just been doing their career really hard, a really long time, and they kind of say the same thing that people who are younger say. It's like, well, I still feel like I'm not there yet. And so a role model for me, because, I'm very type A like that as well, a role model for me is like, okay, who's the most relaxed person in the room? Or like, not only relaxed, but like successful and might not have anything to prove to anybody. And so like, there's 1 or 2 family friends, like, we have get-togethers. It's just so funny seeing them because they're the most relaxed, like zenned out people who have highly successful careers who are retired now. And I'm able to just kind of sit in the room with them, and they're not like getting upset over this or that, and they don't have anything to prove to anybody. And it's just like such an amazing place to be. And it's like, how can I be there right now? And just seeing them, it's like, okay, like if I kind of, I get cues from them as to, how to take more of that on. So role models for me are more like, how can I do less and enjoy it? How to get the job done, but then also say, okay, now I've gotten the job done, now I can rest and relax and enjoy it.
Very cool. Finally, what is one word of advice you would have for high school students, maybe 9th or 10th grade, who are trying to explore what they want to put on their CV one day?
What I would say to every student is you need to document as much of your extracurricular activities and work as you can, because nobody else is going to do it, especially your schools. So even the top schools in Saigon, even most top schools everywhere, when you graduate, they give you a diploma and they give you a bunch of numbers that are used for college applications, and that's it. And for example, if you went to an employer with top IB score in Ho Chi Minh City, they would have no idea what that meant because it doesn't have value on the free market, right? So basically what you need to do is you have all these amazing opportunities to document your ability to add value to your friends, to your school community. It doesn't even have to be work related. And so just make sure you're documenting that through photos, videos, testimonials from friends. Just if you did something and somebody enjoyed it, just ask them to give a 30-second recording of it, or maybe take a before and after photo of something you did, things like that. And if you're doing that in 9th grade, like by the time you're a senior, you have this full portfolio that's just ready to go for whatever your entry level, job is in your career of interest.
That is such an interesting way to build a portfolio. And to be honest, like something I never imagined. I don't think we thought about this 20 years ago, right? But in today's day and age, so much more relevant and so much easier to do than ever before. We're like, why not? All right. Thank you so much, Andy, for taking the time to chat with us today and share all of your great tips. Yeah, hope to do it again soon on some additional topics.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tony. Definitely looking forward to it.
Nếu bạn thấy video này hữu ích, hãy like và share để video được chia sẻ đến nhiều người hơn và lan tỏa những giá trị có ích cho mọi người. Nếu bạn mong muốn được học hỏi từ các chuyên gia giàu kinh nghiệm, College Compass chính là người đồng hành ở bên bạn trên chặng đường chinh phục giấc mơ của mình. Đừng quên nhấn nút subscribe và nhận notification để theo dõi những video và nội dung mới nhất từ College Compass nhé.